I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. Why do we watch horror movies? Why are we horror fans so dedicated to a genre that most people think is in bad taste? And in some extremes, they even think is harmful to society. Well, I think there's many answers as to why we watch. But for most of us, I would say it probably comes down to some form of a release. For some, that release can just be an adrenaline rush. For others, it's a taste for the forbidden. Often horror is a stand-in for real-life monsters that we can't control. So sometimes it's taking care of those monsters in a wish fulfillment. It's all valid. But horror also allows us to explore the real-life monsters inside of us, our shadow selves. We safely experience stuff we never really want to have experienced in real life, and then we walk back into the real world and we leave that stuff behind. Horror is built to take you out of your comfort zone, and it can only get people out of their comfort zones if it pushes buttons. Horror is a button pusher. Of course, as horror fans, we know that we swim in darker waters than most. And in doing so, that does cause us some unwanted attention. It really sets us up for some social stigmas. Now, the harmless side of the social stigma that comes along with horror is people think it's a sign of arrested development. It's a childish preoccupation with the morbid. But we are also a target for groups who find many of the movies that we watch morally reprehensible. More than once in film history, horror films were banned, and sometimes the directors were arrested or put on trial because of the content of the films. And because of that, many horror fans are very sensitive about discussions around what should and shouldn't be permitted in movies. If the word censorship gets used, the shields go right up. And because of that, the horror community is a landscape with a very to each their own mindset, especially around violent content. And sometimes that allows some real-life monsters to hide amongst our ranks, relying on our permissiveness in order for them to flourish. Now, I don't believe in censorship. If you listen to my show, I think it's pretty apparent. One of the reasons that I'm not for censorship is that I don't think that in any way, shape, or form it is effective. I think all it does is eradicate one film from being seen, and that's usually pretty temporary. Censorship does nothing to change the feelings, the point of view, the mindset that allowed that movie to be possible in the first place. Movies aren't created in a vacuum. Movies are controversial because they hit on a touchy subject. And that touchy subject is in the air at the time. I also don't believe in banning films. Once again, the key reason for that is because it's ineffective. I can tell you from personal experience that the video nasties list from Britain from the 1980s made my curiosity go through the roof. I needed to see those movies, and quite a few of them weren't worth the time to watch, and they really weren't that offensive. Sometimes what was offensive was kind of vague and random. However, those movies got a new life by being on the video nasties list. Didn't matter about the quality. They became infamous and legendary in the eyes of fans who hadn't seen them. So I'm not for censorship or for banning of movies. However, I am all for calling out filmmakers if what they do outrages me. It's probably obvious that I'm not easily offended by extreme horror or bad taste. To me, intent and motive matters as much as content. I call out the extreme stuff when I think it's cynical and heartless, and when it panders to sadists just for the money grab. I'm not going to ban you or censor you, but I might call you a dick. I'm all for people making noise when a movie bothers them. If you have the strength of your convictions to actually stand up and say, this goes too far, I applaud you. I think it's healthy that we find out where our limits are and that we keep ourselves in check. I also believe that if a filmmaker wants to shock you just to shock you, they should be able to stand behind their work. I'm keeping that in mind for myself, too. We horror fans are pretty vocal. But when somebody in the horror community does stand up and address a problem inside the community itself, Well, that's a different story. Often people find themselves alone when they speak out. When somebody openly calls out a horror movie or the filmmakers themselves about crossing a line, people get nervous really quick. They want that conversation to go away. Of course, this kind of makes sense, right? Because we watch some movies specifically to indulge our darkest emotions. Sometimes we just want to look at something horrible. And even though that's valid, it does make us vulnerable to scrutiny. In that way, we horror fans have our own inverse stigma. We know horror films have been unfairly accused of inciting violence and of being menace to decent society, so we are gun-shy about being seen making that same kind of moral judgment. Nobody wants to be the new version of those folks we used to laugh at. So we err on the side of caution, and we stay neutral. People in glass houses should throw stones, after all. We say nothing. And unfortunately, that silence creates a perfect hiding place for real sadists and real misogynists in the community. They take advantage of our fascination with extreme cinema. They take advantage of our aversion to finger pointing so that they can promote real cruelty and real hatred. The reluctance to speak out makes us susceptible to very black and white thinking. And it's easy for aggressive people to manipulate black and white thinking because it's an unrealistic way to look at things in a world full of different shades of gray. Manipulative people use black and white thinking to create false dilemmas. The setup is to create an either-or choice, like you're either for us or you're against us. In the business world, this is what's called the fool's choice. It's a false scenario that sets us up to believe that there are only two choices, and neither of them are any good. The choices here are speak up and perhaps make enemies, or stay quiet and be uncomfortable in the silence. But there are always more choices if people are willing to discuss the issue. Be wary of anyone who won't discuss options. Because my way or the highway is not really a choice. It's somebody trying to bully you into doing what they want you to do and make you feel as if you made the choice. The reason I bring this up is because recently there was an unfortunate incident that happened at one of the largest horror conventions in the United States. It involved a panel discussion that started out about distribution and financing of independent films, but it ended up as an unscheduled marketing stunt that made light of rape and torture in a room full of women filmmakers and fans. And when people spoke up about it later, they were met with anger, blame, and contempt. Now, this incident is symptomatic of a disturbing trend I'm seeing at conventions, and it seems to be growing, so I wanted to talk about it. And I'm doing my best to keep myself from falling into the fool's choice on this. I've been conflicted about discussing this on a show for all the reasons that I mentioned before. The conversation will make some people uncomfortable. I may get angry trolls. In fact, I probably will. And I'm an easy target to call a hypocrite because I champion many extreme horror films, some of which feature rape and torture explicitly. Of course, none of this is enough to shut me up. I mean, I know a fool's choice when I see one. But it has made me think critically about how I want to discuss the issue of misogyny rearing its ugly head in the horror community again. Yes, misogyny, probably the dirtiest word in the horror movie vocabulary. It's the one that raises hackles and embarrassment immediately. It is an accusation that's been thrown at the horror genre since the 1970s at least. It is a very sore spot indeed. And that's what makes this uptick in casual misogyny so infuriating to me. More women are finally embracing horror fandom, and more women are making horror films themselves. And they are being met with people baiting them with sexual intimidation and coercion played off as a cynical joke. The people who took over that panel at the horror convention I mentioned did it as a provocative marketing tool for their film. They knew there were women on the panel and in the audience. They knew that people were recording video of the event from their seats. So that means they welcomed the outrage. So there's a dilemma in that, right? If I bring this back up, it could mean giving some bullies more free publicity. Or I can say nothing about it and the bullies will just go away. A perfect fool's choice setup. It seems like we're making a choice, but we're really doing what the bullies want us to do. Give me free publicity or get out of my way and let me just continue to do what I was doing. The reality is, bullies don't just go away because you stay quiet. They just get to be bullies somewhere else, and you're passing off the problem to somebody else. Since I don't like having just one choice or the other, I decided to go for a third choice. I'm going to talk about this incident, but I'm not going to name the people involved, or the name of the convention, or the name of the movie. You can Google everything rather easily, and there's even a 57-minute video of the entire panel that I'm going to discuss online. This was all public. See, I don't really care about the movie as much. I want to talk about the intention and the motives and the behavior of the bullies behind the movie. So let's set the scene for the panel that was taking place at this horror convention. The subject was fundraising and distribution. The panelists were a mixture of men and women filmmakers who work on very low-budget movies. The moderator was a woman who is a professor of media and film, as well as a member of the convention staff itself. Now, it's important to point out that people on a panel don't necessarily know each other, and they may not have even seen each other's work. So when you come onto a panel, especially when you're in front of the paying public, you show each other professional courtesy on stage because it's an opportunity to gain fans and also to network with other filmmakers. So the panel starts with each of the filmmakers introducing themselves and what they're working on. The first person to introduce themselves was one of the founders of the Women in Horror Film Festival. She gave a little bit of information about what she was up to, and then she handed off the microphone to another woman who was at the convention to promote her second full-length horror film. Now, the microphone makes its way down the table to each participant until it gets to a cheerful young producer. He introduces himself, and then he says, "My movie is about sexual conditioning." And there's silence while people try to figure out what he means. You know, it's not a common term, but sexual conditioning is a practice in the BDSM community. It's consensual sex play between a dominant and a submissive. The sub is trained through punishment to behave a certain way to commands. Now, there's a nervous laugh from the audience, and then the director stands up and tries to rally the audience to cheer sexual conditioning. After that dies down, he informs everyone that his movie is based on a true crime that happened in the 1980s. He invites the audience to the premiere that night, and then he hands off the microphone. Now, this producer's opening statement is a great example of exploitation cinema promotion. He's charismatic, and he keeps his movie mysterious and provocative. And he only gives a little information, and everybody is curious. And it is apparent that most of the panel and the audience only know as much about his movie as he's just revealed. Now, the panel goes along pleasantly for the first half an hour. In fact, this producer is amicable. He's good-natured, and he's complimentary to the people on the panel. He spends a lot of time talking about metrics and knowing who your audience is. He has a marketing degree. But then things get a little weird when he asks the movie's director, who is also one of the lead actors in the film, to come up to the stage. The producer says, I know this is about marketing, but we've had so much fun here. I want the director to come up and talk about the art. I know this is about marketing, but let's talk about the art. It's an unusual move. See, what he's done is he's derailed the conversation, and for the moment, he's also supplanted the moderator. She's put in an odd situation, so she waves the actor-director to the stage. The producer starts clapping to get the audience to follow suit. Not only has the producer now focused the conversation towards his movie, he's also gained an ally on the stage. Now, taking over a panel to turn it into a promo for your film is a dick move. But hey, you know what? That's just showbiz. The moderator tries to steer the conversation back by praising the director for his commitment to his role in the movie. He gained 150 pounds to play the killer in the film. And then she tries to bring it back to the rest of the panel by talking about how everyone on the stage here performs many duties on their films. This is the way things go in the independent world. And then The producer decides it's time to be provocative. He takes the microphone back from his director, who hasn't been able to say a word yet. The producer says, from a marketing standpoint, me being a Filipino actor, there's no way I'm marketable. Nobody's going to want to see a movie that I'm in. So I get it. And I'm grateful that the conference here got a movie that I'm going to be in where And he pauses for effect. And he gets this sardonic smile. And where I get to, and it's acting, by the way, where I get to rape a girl, and that's kind of tricky, isn't it? And the room is dead quiet. When the producer mentions rape in such a cavalier way, the two male filmmakers on either side of him look away. And then the producer says, "This is just groundbreaking, and we are super grateful to be here at this convention, and this is why we love film festivals." Now, the producer just used a very interesting tactic. He starts his speech with a note of humility, and then he says something absolutely scandalous, and then he politely praises the conference and the audience. It makes the scandalous comment feel surreal and random. Did that really happen? And nobody knows how to quite react. It's like, it's so great for a guy like me to be here. Rape is funny. Let's give a hand to this great crew and audience. Always be polite, right? Now, when you look back at his earlier comment around sexual conditioning, you realize that he did the same thing. Now, sexual conditioning, speaking of that term, since this has come up, if this movie is about sexual conditioning, a consensual sex game, why is there suddenly talk about rape? Why are you connecting those two? And it's about this time that the audience and the rest of the panel finally find out exactly what true crime of the 1980s this movie is based on. From 1983 to 1985, a sadistic serial killer and his accomplice raped, tortured, and murdered an estimated 25 people in an isolated cabin about 150 miles outside of San Francisco. These two men abducted families, and they would murder the men and the babies immediately, but they'd keep the women alive. These two men wanted to break a woman down through torture and rape and violence until they created the perfect submissive sex slave. They wanted to be able to use a woman whenever and however they wanted. And when they grew tired or bored of her, they simply wanted to put her away in a small room and get her out of their sight until they wanted to use her again. How do we know this? Well, we know this because these real-life serial killers recorded the rapes, the torture, and the murders on videotape. They also recorded their philosophy and their motivation because to them, this was all an experiment. Now, I will be honest, this is a truly unsettling and disturbing true story. But as a horror movie fan, it is also a provocative idea for possibilities in a movie. If this idea was put in the right hands, you could have a nasty social commentary that focuses on the dehumanizing effects of objectification. You could have an allegory about how suffering is indoctrinated upon women and fetishized, just like the original French extremism film Martyrs. And all you need to do that is shift the focus to the victims. Show them as human beings, and the audience would be immediately compelled to empathize with them. However, that is not the movie that was made. The movie this director and producer made is a shot-for-shot recreation of what was on those original videotapes from the 80s. It mimics a videotape that serial killers used for fantasy material, and the producer and the director play the serial killers. The panel discussion opens up to Q&A. And the producer answers a question about revenue streams by saying how important it is to know your audience. His niche group is the true crime enthusiast. And the producer mentions that horror fans are not as excited by the film. And his director piggybacks on this comment. And he says, I wanted to say something that was relevant. When it comes to horror fans, they don't seem to think that it goes far enough. But I personally found, and we discussed this, that it is horrific for women. It is a horror film for women. although true crime fans do love it. But if you're looking at it as a horror film, that's the demographic. It's absolutely terrifying to women, not so much men. I didn't know that rape and torture was a gender-specific issue. Now keep in mind that this is a recreation of true events, not a fantasy idea invented for titillation. Who are these men who are disappointed there's not more rape and torture in this film? And why would you want them as a demographic in the first place? Now, the producer is interrupted by the co-founder of the Women in Horror Film Festival, who's thinking just like I am. She is all the way down at the other end of the table. And it suddenly becomes apparent to me that the women on the panel haven't said a word for the last 10 minutes. In fact, the producer and director have slowly turned their backs on that side of the table, and they are completely engaging only with the male filmmakers with their repartee. She asked the producer, how does he know that men don't find this movie scary? Did he do focus groups? The answer is an emphatic yes. They did a focus group at the University of Santa Barbara. The producer mentions with glee that the teacher that they screened the film for said that showing this movie could get him fired. Now, if you go and watch the online video of this event, you can sense the tension in the dead silent auditorium. And it's about this time the director of the film walks off the stage, presumably back to his seat. But instead, he stands at the end of the table next to the woman, the co-founder of the Women in Horror Film Festival, and he leans on the edge of the table. When an audience member asks a question to the panel, what is the funniest or strangest favor your producer ever asked of you? The director-actor then very quickly picks up a microphone on the table and says, to gain 300 pounds and pretend to rape women. Sorry. And then he does a little mic drop onto the table right in front of her. And she ignores him. This all gets nervous laughter. At another point, the producer talks about how Facebook removed their trailer. Now, the trailer was unedited footage with nudity, and it was on the movie's Facebook group page. After it was pulled, they added black bars over the breasts and the genitalia, and then they reposted it. Yeah, we did that kind of as a fuck you to the person who tagged us as torture porn. He mentions that the edited trailer gets even more hits now. And thus endeth the marketing lesson. For as much as this producer talked about how important knowing your audience was, he didn't care to read the room. As much as he stressed metrics and good business sense, he didn't adjust his pitch when his comments were met with awkward silence. The subject matter of the movie was so provocative that he could have presented it multiple ways, and the audience would still have been intrigued. So why did he choose to alienate the women in attendance by being glib and irreverent about real-life rape, torture, and murder? By the way, real-life rape, torture, and murder that he felt was important enough to recreate shot for shot in his film. Well, in my opinion, he didn't care because they aren't his demographic. You might argue that he was nervous and said stupid stuff under pressure to entertain, but the panel discussion isn't the end of the story. Things got even more uncomfortable when this horror movie won a special effects award at this major horror convention. Now, I've watched the movie because if I'm going to sit here and play journalist, I should at least see it. Instead of going into detail on the contents of the film, what I'll say is that it breaks no new ground. And I say that in possibly the most bizarre way I can, because if you go to YouTube and you do a search for the actual serial killers covered in the film, their real, authentic videotape recordings are there. There are true crime documentaries that have clips from the tapes in them. And if you watch this new film, you can see that what they recreate are clips that you can watch on YouTube, clips that are already in documentaries. It's the same dialogue, and it's the same line delivery. Although I could compare this film to other true crime or serial killer films, there's a movie from 1991 that this film reminds me of the most. They are, as far as I'm concerned, spiritual twins. that has a super long title, this 1991 film. The title is Night of the Day, of the Dawn, of the Sun, of the Bride, of the Return, of the Revenge, of the Terror, of the Attack of the Evil, Mutant, Alien, Flesh-Eating, Hellbound, Zombified, Living Dead, Part 2. Now, this movie was made to profit off the very famous loss of copyright to George Romero's 1968 Night of the Living Dead. The filmmakers redubbed this masterpiece that fell into the public domain with fart jokes and goofy voices. Every 15 minutes or so, there'd be some new footage, and that footage would be of the filmmakers who wear masks, and they'd hold up a sign that said, "Sorry, Mr. Romero." Nevertheless, this film won an effects award, and that night, at the movie screening, the producer and director introduced the film with their award in hand. Now, bear in mind that screenings encourage the press to show up and cover it and record it. Here's what the producer had to say. "We just won an awesome fucking award here, and I can't believe it, because our movie is about sexual abduction, and basically it's an instruction manual on how to rape women." This is met with stunned silence at first, and then chuckles of disbelief. After a few uncomfortable moments, the producer gets that sardonic grin on his face again, and he feigns shock, and he goes, "Oops." Of course, that speech was planned, and it was a fuck you that openly taunted anyone who might dare to have issues with their film. It didn't matter to them if the media disapproved of them or not. The media wasn't their demographic. Now, some of the male filmmakers who were on the finance panel showed up at that screening. As soon as the movie started, they all got up in unison and they left in protest. But the producer and director had one more weird marketing stunt planned for the screening. After the screening, they went down to the bar as their serial killer characters from the film, in character, and set up a karaoke event. They encouraged women to come up and sing along with the serial killers. After the convention ended, audience video recordings of the hour-long fundraising and distribution panel surfaced on Facebook, and a few women who were in attendance posted about the experience. One of them was a filmmaker who was a guest of the convention and was involved with the panel. She admitted that it was a hard post for her to write, because she works in the horror community and she's a lifelong fan. But she felt it was important to start a constructive dialogue with both men and women about the impact of this incident. She wrote that women are a large portion of the community now, and the importance of feeling welcomed, respected, and safe at conventions is big. She felt that the flippant way that rape was discussed and how it was dealt with was disrespectful to the women that were in attendance. She explicitly stressed, however, that she was anti-censorship, and she was not calling for a ban of the film or to even tell people they shouldn't see it. The purpose of this post was to draw attention to how incidents like that can tarnish the conference experience for a large portion of the attendees. She wanted a discussion between men and women towards positive change, not to disparage and denigrate. She included a video that included portions of the panel discussion and the introductory speech at the movie screening. She also included a link to the unedited 57-minute video of the panel so people could see the context for themselves. And that is when things came to a head. The producer found out about the post and he replied directly to it. He claimed that he and his director were being intentionally misrepresented and their words were taken out of context. He pointed to the video and said it was edited down, and it was edited down to make him look bad, and that he was the victim. And then he shared that post with his demographic. The replies were immediate, sarcastic, and insulting, and a multitude. What, you were offended by a horror movie? Give me a break. Whose fault is that? Her common sense was questioned, and then it was explained how she missed the intended humor. Others started talking about the slippery slope of censorship, and others mentioned how censorship is a opening of a can of worms. Some gave warnings against pulling out the banning hammer. It didn't matter that she adamantly said she wasn't calling for a ban or wanted to censor the film. They made sure the words censorship and banning were all over that thread. It was also suggested that she was too sensitive for horror and that she should learn to accept it or stop watching them. Aha, the fool's choice always shows up wherever there's a bully. Now, eventually, the post got so crazy that it was deleted. To her credit, once she deleted it, she just started a new one. You know, women don't convince me to talk about this stuff. It's the men who convince me. It's seeing that kind of thing happening live that convinces me that what the women are saying is real. As this new thread went up, I was pleased to see other filmmakers chime in to call bullshit on the arguments of the producer and his trolls. Male directors of some of the more notorious extreme horror films chided the producer that they don't tolerate that kind of talk on their sets. Their lives are hard enough making extreme films without some joker proving the critics of the films right with their thoughtlessness. Cameramen and grips and actors talked about how unprofessional their actions were, especially when you're addressing the public. But the most powerful thing that came out of the new thread was how many women shared their own stories about the sense of menace that they've felt at conventions. Women wrote about being followed back to their hotel rooms by strangers and having to go back downstairs to lose them. Others talked about men coming up to them and asking to pose for a picture with them, and when they said no, they were angrily insulted. Since I go to conventions and I do this show, I have a lot of people who are actors and directors that are on my social media pages. I am stunned at how often I hear stories from the women about how they are harassed by male fans at public events. These are women who are guests of the convention that they're attending. They're getting groped during photo ops. And when they protest, the guy is incredulous because he paid good money just to get a picture. The movie the director and producer made may be in bad taste and offensive, but in the end, to me, it's just a distraction. It's Alfred Hitchcock's MacGuffin. The real misogyny is the casual, offhand use of rape and torture to bait people. The real misogyny is using the outrage of women and stoking the rage of closet misogynists as a marketing tool, just another metric to use on the streaming services. The misogyny is the contempt shown to the women who voice their upset by using shame and ridicule and intimidation to shut them up. Accusing women of not having a sense of humor or being thin-skinned when your purpose was to offend them shows how little you think of them. Now you may ask, why did I think this was so important to talk about? Well, I'll answer that with a question of my own. Why, in 2008, did someone think that a movie that was a shot-by-shot recreation of the true-life rape and humiliation and torture of women by serial killers was necessary? Why now, right now, at this moment in history, did someone think that this was needed? Movies aren't created in a vacuum. Movies are controversial because they hit on a touchy subject that is in the air at the time. Right now, at this moment in history, there is something called the incel rebellion. These are angry men who are united by their inability to convince women to have sex with them. And it may sound funny, but this rebellion has a body count. In 2014, one man killed 6 and he wounded 14 more in Santa Barbara, California. And just recently, another incel member killed 10 people in Toronto by running them over with a van. Right now, at this moment in history, there is a men's rights group, the Return of Kings, that wants to legalize rape that doesn't take place in public places. Nice distinction. I felt it was important to talk about this because we need to police ourselves. Because bullies and sadists find hiding places where people are afraid to speak out. And because we watch extreme horror, we are susceptible to the fool's choice when something or someone crosses a line. I love the horror community too much to allow it to become another Gamergate because I'm afraid to be called a hypocrite. Stuff like this keeps happening, which I think means that horror is once again unconsciously pushing the anxieties we want to ignore to the surface. And they need to be worked out, and I think horror films can help. Sexual assault and rape are some of the most horrific acts human beings can do to one another. So, of course, it's a subject that is worth addressing in a horror film. Context matters. In addition, the pervasiveness of these despicable acts in society, especially considering the number of rapes that still go unreported, means that we need to find new ways to portray sexual assault and rape in film that is honest and powerful and unflinching and ugly. We need to portray this in ways that truly address the issue and make people aware of how terrible and terribly common these acts are. I think horror movies can be a vanguard during social change just by the way we look at the world, unedited and grotesque. But we also need to pull our own covers. We need to expose the actions and the dark places within ourselves and within our community that we no longer need. Because we horror fans swim in dark waters, and we know that we take a risk the further we get away from the shore. But just because we swim in the dark waters doesn't mean we need to drown in them. It's that time. Oh my goodness. I've had several people contact me about financially supporting the show. And I want to say that Hellbent for Horror is a listener-funded show. I don't sell advertising. I don't waste your listening time with ads. Now, that said, the show does need your help to keep going the way that it has been. So if you like the show and you think you're getting some value out of it, there are several ways that you can help us out. You can tell others about the show, probably the greatest thing you can do. You can write reviews on iTunes, and you can support the show financially from a couple different methods. If you want to use a credit card or a debit card, you can contribute an amount per episode using Patreon. You can also contribute using PayPal. Both Patreon and PayPal will take a percentage of your payment. I know some people don't like to use PayPal or Patreon. So H4H is listed on Zelle, Z-E-L-L-E. Zelle is a digital transfer service that is an option on most U.S. bank accounts. So you can find me on Zelle by my email address, scott2ts@hellbentforhorror.com, and just list a dollar value you feel is fair. You can also make that a recurring payment by clicking on a button when you fill out the information. Finally, and I haven't done this yet, but if you're not into the whole digital payment thing, let me know. Because I can set up a P.O. box and you can send checks or money orders or hate mail or chickens or sponges. I could always use a sponge. You can send all of that to the address. And if there's a way you wish to support that I haven't listed here, just contact me and I'll get that service up and running for the podcast. All these payment options are on my website, and that's hellbentforhorror.com. So it's easy to support the podcast and keep it going, and I thank you so much. So let's go to the listener mailbag. We have a listener today that I want to talk about. His name is Dennis Gilmet. I hope I said that right. I'm assuming I probably got Gilmet right because he's, I believe, an outside of Boston boy, and I spent a little bit of time there. So I want to read his mail. Hopefully I don't need my glasses. Scott, my name is Dennis Gilmet, and I just wanted to take a moment to write and thank you for your amazing podcast. I only recently discovered it and it has become an addiction. I've been listening to them back to back, and we appear to be the same age range. Your references feel as if they were plucked from my own thoughts. And what I want to talk about is my first kiss with you. It was actually a double whammy from a creature double feature. Yes, I was raised just north of Boston when I was 9 years old. The films would not be particularly frightening to my 52-year-old self, but when I had not yet even reached an age with double digits, Let's Scare Jessica to Death, and The Shuttered Room terrified me. Even with all the podcasts that you have done, I don't recall hearing either of those films referenced. Hope you know them, and if you don't, hope you will enjoy them. Just a thought for future episodes. So I will tell you that I love Let's Scare Jessica to Death, and I even have the soundtrack for it. It's a lot of fun. Thanks so much for that email. And if you want to have me read your email, send something to the listener mailbag. You can get in touch with me on instant message by way of Facebook, the Facebook groups page. You can also go to Hellbent Horror on Twitter and leave me a direct message. And there's also scott@hellbentforhorror.com. You can leave something there. Now we get to the pick of the episode, the movie that I want to talk about here. And the one that I'm going to talk about this time is a documentary, actually. It is 7852, Hitchcock's Shower Scene, 2017. In 78 camera setups, with 52 edits, all happening within 3 minutes, Hitchcock made murder art in films overnight. And this is a very extensive, very Catholic look at this shower sequence. And it took 7 days to shoot that one scene. This documentary talks about the reasons why Hitchcock made the film and all the little things that make it unique. It is peppered with interviews with actors and directors. The thing I don't like about it is I hate when they do recreations because first off, you're doing Psycho and you want to do a recreation and you're a documentarian, you're probably not going to hit that art note. And there are a couple moments where I'm like going, please get back to the talking heads. Please show me some of the shots. Please show me the script. I'm happy with all of that. Show me the novel that it came from and the annotations that Hitchcock put in his book. All of that is really fascinating. So we have interviews with actors and directors. The best are the interviews with people who are technical. The Oscar-winning editor Walter Murch shows up, and he shows the odd things that don't register visually in that sequence, but emotionally. It's jump cuts and axis crosses. These are things that were very revolutionary at the time. In fact, if you did some of those things in Hollywood films, especially, and any American films, they would consider that an error. They would consider that a mistake. And Hitchcock ended up using those to really fool the eye and to really engross you and give you a sense memory and some kind of emotional, visceral impact that is happening because your eye is just lightly confused. It's brilliant stuff to listen to. Amy E. Duddleston is also another editor, and I like her because she's the editor of Gus Van Sant's remake of Psycho. So it's really interesting to have her talk about what their intentions were, what she tried to do, and what she loved about the original, and how she cut it exactly like the original in the first draft that they did. And it didn't work. They needed to go another way. There's some alchemy that just wasn't happening in color. And then you get to talk to Marley Renfro. It's Janet Leigh's body double. And she still calls Hitchcock Mr. Hitchcock. It's a lot of fun. She's sweet, and she talks about all of the complications that there are when you are nude and the director wants you to be nude, but you can't show certain things. Anyway, I give a fine recommendation to the movie 7852, and I rate this movie 5 rabid weasels direct from the Unita Medical Supplies Company. Welcome back to 5 Horrible Minutes on Hellbent for Horror. Yes, this is 5 questions, 5 minutes. God help us all. We'll see what ends up happening. My guest today on 5 Horrible Minutes is Rakefet Abergel, horror fan and a writer of the short horror film Jackson Love, which was a finalist at the Women in Horror Film Festival last year. And I'm going to be attending the Women in Horror Film Festival. That's going to be October 4th through 7th in Peachtree, Georgia. So I thought it'd be fun to start talking to some of the artists who were there before, who are horror fans. So Rakefet, thanks so much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
So let's hit right into these 5 horrible questions. So tell us a little bit about your movie, Jackson Love.
Well, I never thought it was a horror, but it turns out that it is. I wrote it because I used to be a stand-up comedian. Sometimes I still do it. I do a lot of comedy, Disney, Nickelodeon, and I was like getting kind of pigeonholed into this box, and I decided to write like something that I felt was really dark and different for me to do in a role that I would never, ever get cast in because I just wouldn't. And I wanted to show that I could. So it's about a girl who's lonely. She's looking for love and kind of goes about it in a very unhealthy way.
So do you find, since you're a stand-up comedian, and I know that it's anathema to try and define comedy or anything like that, but do you feel that there's a connection between horror and comedy? I've always thought that there was a timing thing, at least.
Yeah, I think for sure the timing thing, because like just like with comedy, you know, if you don't hit the right notes or you don't hit the right beats in horror, it's not scary, or it comes off either. Like there was a lot of things in my film that I had to cut because it came off a little too funny. There's definitely some comedy in there for sure because I can't help myself, but I didn't want it to come off as like a spoof or some kind of horror comedy. So I had to really be careful about timing of things to make it not that way. So I think there's definitely a correlation between the two.
Now we're going to get into a little bit of horror. On my show, the listeners are used to hearing me talk about The First Kiss. And The First Kiss is the movie that kind of hooked you into a lifetime of ill-begotten horror movies. So what was your first kiss?
I probably have more first bad dates than first kisses. But for me, I think it was actually at Nightmares Film Festival, which was, I think, the second festival I went to. And it was, because before that, every horror film just scared the hell out of me. And I was like, nope. But it was the shorts, like the short films. I would say it was probably, I don't know. Michael Foster directed this short called Hush. And he knows I'm like a rabid fan of it now, but that might be my first kiss, to be honest. It was like, I was just like, wow, like it's so smart. And I guess I never really looked at horror as smart, and it is, especially now, because it's changing a lot, because people are changing the way they make the films in the genre. But it was smart, and it creeped me out, and I didn't see the end coming. I guess it's along the lines of like most of the psychological thrillers I've seen in my past are more my horror, like my subgenre of horror that I really like M. Night Shyamalan stuff. And I don't know if that's horror really, but horror light, I don't know.
Yeah, I have a very wide door that I allow horror into.
Yeah, Jax, I mean, I had to ask people, like, I don't know if I can submit this in the horror genre. And they were like, you can. And I was like, I don't know. I always thought of horror as my first bad date, which was The Shining. Like, nope. That's the one that to me, that's horror. And too horrific. And Child's Play, that was the first one.
Oh, yeah.
As a child. You don't want to see that as a child when you hate horror movies. Like, I still can't look at his face. Like, it's terrifying.
Tom Holland, the director, is overjoyed that you just said that.
Oh, and I keep running into him in festivals, and I want to be like, you ruined my child. No, it scared me.
So out of those movies, you may have already answered this, but I like to ask, people tend to think of horror in either the thing that they love or the thing that they hate. And that's how they define it. Either they're going to love it or they're going to hate it. What movie scene flashes in your mind when you hear the word horror?
For me, it's from The Shining, and it's the two little girls standing in the hallway, come play with us, or whatever it is. And the word red rum, I like to this day, like I can't hear it. Like if somebody creepily like says to me, I'll lose my mind. And I always see the blood rushing out of the elevator. That whole movie, all the little scenes, like that's the movie. When I think horror, I think The Shining. That's the one.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. That is one of those highly impactful films, to say the least, for everybody. I have to laugh that you didn't think that Jack's in Love would be a horror film. It's like, your comedy must be really fucking dark.
It probably is. I don't know. I considered it like a psychological thriller, but I don't know. I didn't think that would like qualified. And there was not that much blood, nobody's arms came off.
Well, welcome to the broad world of horror, as at least I see it. Now, obviously, you have comedy in your background. You probably have a really interesting guilty pleasure movie. Most of the time when I'm talking to people who are big horror fans, their guilty pleasure is something not horror whatsoever. But
right.
What is it for you? What's the movie that you are almost embarrassed to say that you love, but you love?
Okay, well, I thought about this, and it's it's the Twilight series.
Ah!
I love me some sparkly vampires. What can I say? I don't know. I read all the books twice. I saw all the movies, and 50 Shades is probably a close second. I don't know. I gotta love that stuff.
All right, awesome. Well, I was going to ask, what was it that really excited you about Twilight? But maybe
I liked the love triangle. I'm really into like the romance and the angst and the like have to have it now kind of a feeling. I'm a teenager still. Like I'm 6 forever. That's just me.
It doesn't change, believe me.
No.
No, the only thing that changes is how it feels when you wake up. That's the only difference.
That's true. Your body feels different, but the rest of it's the same.
Right. So, Rakefet, thank you so much for answering the 5 questions. Tell us where people can see Jackson Love. It's on the theater, the circuit right now for festivals, correct?
Yes.
Where can they see it?
At the moment, I don't know because we're
Okay.
waiting for the next festivals to like accept or not accept. I do know we're waiting on like at least 70. I submitted to a lot of festivals.
Wow.
So we are waiting on some. I'm sure there will be more screenings. I'm planning on doing a couple like VIP screenings in LA, maybe at these like friends' mansions that I have screening rooms and stuff like that. I was trying to do little things like that. But hopefully by next year, it'll be somewhere online, like not illegally, hopefully.
Of course.
But, yeah.
Where can people contact you if they want to keep up with your work?
Well, you can visit jacksonlove.com and you can watch trailers and see behind the scenes and all that stuff. We're also going to release like a behind the scenes featurette that we made later on. And you can contact me via the website or on Twitter or on Facebook. I'm literally everywhere. If you search for Rakefet Abergel or Jackson Love, you'll find me for sure.
Okay. Well, Rakefet, thank you so much once again for being here, and stay hell-bent if you can.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and my Twitter handle is hellbenthorror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And in the wings is a Hellbent for Horror book entitled Screaming for Pleasure. I'm currently writing it, and we're shooting for a release in the fall of 2018, so spread the word and keep your eye out. More info on that later. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.